Okay. Well, greetings from the United States and the great Midwest state of Wisconsin. I should say good evening to you. It's morning here.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about trauma and the role of nutrition. And accumulative stress equals metabolic chaos. And just a brief background, this journey began when we adopted a child from an orphanage in South Korea. And due to abandonment, I had a lot to learn about attachment disorder, and I did that through attending many seminars, participating in support groups, scores of reading, and even years of counseling. A lot of what I learned was useful when I began to work with women about 20 years ago. I firmly took in a woman from Kosovo with 2 small children, then a woman from Pakistan, and even a woman from Punjab, India. So my heart is with all of you. After that, I started a group called Heartbeat of the Nations. And this went under the nonprofit group 2013 of Global Outreach Foundation. I became aware of human trafficking in about 2006 and did several fundraisers, community awarenesses. We did a 2012 Silver and made the Esther Freedom Dolls. Following this, I felt led to open an international learning center offering ESL, sewing, skills training, along with planning different community and family events. So what I'm going to share with you, learning about the effects of abuse and stress and brain injuries on individuals, along with my own personal journey of adrenal exhaustion a few years ago, all attributed to this work and my knowledge. I did a lot of counseling, took some classes to assist women, and in 2018, the nutritionist who worked with me for my recovery, we presented a nutritional workshop for international women, which included information on stress and metabolic chaos that it creates. Okay, so stressful situations are often beyond our control. As you've all been talking about stressful situations, stress from traumatic incidences such as trafficking or other violence, abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, or psychological. Death and loss create stressors. Economic and financial stressors. So these are all different areas that impact our health when we go through these things. And as you can see on the chart on the right side, stress factors such as helplessness, immobility, shock, trauma, even head injuries, burns, different things like this, all create an impact on our bodies. In fact, I took a woman once to a center in Boston a number of years ago who was affected by trauma. And they actually used something called brain games, where they would have their people who attended or came to the center for healing and therapy. They used brain games 1 hour a day to help rewire the brain. So it's very important that people who have been traumatized, that they can get help in these areas. Because once the fight or flight instinct begins to kick in, when a person suffers traumatic crises, this causes our body to pump cortisol and adrenaline to survive. We're meant to shift back, but people often get stuck in these modes. And you can see the pattern in which it flows. Chronic stress keeps stimulating the production of cortisol and adrenaline, leaving our stress response system constantly on. And this desensitizes our body in different ways, leading to dysfunction. So let's go to the next slide. Understanding attachment issues for trauma victims. Caregivers must maintain a fine balance of structure while keeping the environment nurturing. Traumatized children, so people that you would rescue, they have very difficult times trusting their caregivers because their world, everything is deriving from fear. A really great book, I'm not sure if you can see that real clearly, Don't Touch My Heart. It's a book I read years ago and gave even to family members, helping them to understand the attachment disorders that affected a child who had been abandoned, my daughter. And I learned that children bond through eye contact, touch, movement, voice, and mother's milk, or, you know, when they're being fed, receiving nourishment, sugar. I don't mean table sugar, but, you know, nourishment. So an example of an unattached baby who a foster family had taken in, she was a coke baby, addicted to cocaine because the mother was addicted. And when she held that baby, the baby did not give eye contact. So what they taught them was, when they were feeding the baby and holding the bottle, when the baby would look away, they would take the bottle out of the mouth, and then they would, when the baby would cry, they would begin to talk, rock it, soothe it, and when they returned the eye contact, they would reward it with the feeding. So they had to re-establish these kinds of bonds. So these are the kinds of things that victims who suffered need to go through. Another example is a young African girl who had been in human trafficking in Chicago, was rescued and placed in a home called Ellen's Place. She had been sleeping on a cardboard box in the garage floor. So they could not immediately give her a room and all the nice fixings. Believe it or not, she did not feel like she deserved it. So they had to give her one piece at a time, and a mattress, then a pillow, slowly allowing healing and gaining trust. So these are things that have to be considered. Reducing consequences of stress through diet to aid in the overall healing of trafficked victims. Since stress is accumulative, it is not just one stressor, but ongoing stressors. And so people who are traumatized and abused regularly, starved, not neglected, these cause continual stressors in their lives. Author Seth Gilligan, who is a PhD therapist, he had worked with trauma survivors throughout his career, but he had not previously recommended diets until he read a book called The Transformation by psychiatrist and trauma specialist James Gordon. And he had to rethink his role. So some solutions here are prioritizing healthy foods. When people are rescued, individuals are going to need a diet that is less damaging to the gut, or whole foods, if possible, organic foods, foods with high levels of omega fish and fatty acids. Now, they're vegetarian, may need other sources of omega-3, but supplementing that may be necessary because the fish oil is one of the highest levels. Also, limiting inflammatory foods, and this is a hard one because when people are traumatized or stressed, we are drawn to sugar, foods that comfort. So we need to reduce and limit those highly refined foods and processed sugars that are linked to inflammation and damage to mental health. I even would suggest I buy and had a lot of time when I'm in India, but you can do something like coconut milk to make instead of milk protein, and he's just limiting that at times on supplements and vitamins and minerals. There's some information about that to help with deficiencies. Replenish a healthy gut bacteria using probiotics, and then finally reducing stress as much as possible. The next slide. I'm just going to touch briefly on a Walls diet. Dr. Terry Walls was a physician who had MS and was in a wheelchair for 7 years. And she continued to decline in spite of all the best medicines and treatment. She came across the impact of diet in healing the body, which is came about in 2007. A lot of this research had not yet even been out to the public. She began studying this and did a clinical study on herself using the diet. And after 3 months of pushing high levels of vegetables, which I'll show you a chart in just a minute, 3 months she was able to get out of the wheelchair and walk with a cane. After 6 months, walking without a cane, and after 9 months, riding a bike. Now that's pretty incredible. She has a clinic in Ohio and did a lot of work in the functional medicine world as she went back to school to study those things. So this would summarize kind of her focus. There are 3 plates basically to consider. You need 2 to 3 cups of greens a day. So people need to get more nutrients from whole foods. bright colored vegetables and fruit, and finally self-rich vegetables, which are your onions, garlic, mushrooms, cabbage family. Sorry, I have something in my eye here. Plus quality protein and health fats. Now, in the South India, they use coconut a lot. So the coconut, full-fat coconut milk, coconut oil, ghee, olive oil, those are all great healthy fats. Two approaches, if you would consider, conventional focuses more on slowing the progression of disease disability, and she writes that on page 52 of her book, The Wallace Protocol. Functional medicine looks more deeply at the reasons why. So we're talking about when the body is traumatized and their adrenals are damaged, we need to address the underlying causes to help stimulate healing in a person. So again, restoring body deficiencies. There are tests that one can do for this. Looking at vitamins that people are lacking, maybe from not getting proper diet and food, antioxidants to help restore the immune, and again, using food as medicine. Omega is really important because when a person suffers brain injuries, the brain is fat, so having the oils help heal and increase blood flow to the body. The other area is balancing hormonal imbalances due to stress. As you can see from the chart on the left here, there is a pathway in which is affected by adrenal insufficiency. And just going to a nutritionist that worked with me and taking natural, non-synthetic hormonal supplements to aid in my recovery along with the food and things was very, very important. Education is something that is very important. You all touched on that. Education empowers individuals and families. When we improve people's physical and mental health and well-being, obviously that's going to lead to a more healthy, productive society and well-balanced people. So education can begin in areas of schools, in villages and communities. It's important to look at how we can get information to the people, utilizing perhaps healthcare facilities, clinics, or hospitals to teach on proper nutrition and diet to help with the healing process. Teachers in schools may be very important in this role, to getting information into the hands of families along with children. Faith-based organizations would play a vital role, as well as other non-NGOs. So this is a very important aspect of dealing with healing. One thing we cannot overlook and needs to be given attention to is the health care or the care for workers who care for trauma victims. So health of the rescue teams and workers are going to be at risk. It's a very, very intense and challenging field. So this needs to be taken into consideration, and organizations that work with victims should be looking at the health of their own workers and maintaining that. Workers may need a break after 6 months of work, providing times of respite. Teaching the workers how to take care of oneself and finding ways to cope and manage stress in an effective way. Music can be very relaxing and therapeutic. I know yoga is real big in India, so but the relaxing music, I love to do just simple walks among nature. It's very therapeutic. So these are all areas that we need to address. I know that there's so much out there about rescuing and dealing with the finding of victims, and that is so vital. But once victims are rescued, this is one area that needs to be part of the overall picture for healing. And I hope that you'll look further into this. I've provided a list of resources and books that were very helpful in this, in learning this and organizations, and I hope that you will take further time to address that. Thank you so much for having me share.